Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Dance time.
Ba,
Mhm.
ba, ba, ba,
Just the
ba,
Now you.
slow,
ba, da, ba, ba.
gentle dance now.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, we're back. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hey. Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone. We're back. Thursday. Thank God we're here again. Welcome back to the Social Pillar, everyone. An ongoing conversation about the value of role playing games, crafts, cultures, and communities in our world. Welcome, Jared. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you, Ian. How are you?
I am well.
Beautiful.
Tired, but well. That's
Good.
it. Just for introductions briefly, for me, I am Ian Zammett. I am a role playing games dungeon master, games master for many years. And I run a small company called Role Play Experience to help engage people in role playing games. That would be me. Over to you, Jared.
Hi, I'm Jared, also known as the GM Chef, professional game master on the side, and passionate member of the community who just likes to make conventions happen, make projects like this happen, and otherwise just network with all the amazing people who are out there, including our guest next week, but more of that to come later. Uh, as
Yes.
always, joined with Thea. How are you, Thea?
I am okay. Um, Hi, I'm Thea. I am also known as OMGM. And as you may have gathered from the silent coughing, I am a little unwell tonight. So I'm rocking my excellent crone voice. Um, Clearly a good thing I need to emulate. But yes, I will say now, if I suddenly vanish off screen or suddenly go quiet, I'm trying not to, through the ether, share all my germs. You may also hear, who is another guest on this show quite often, Dean Dog, who
Dean
likes to
Dog.
make his presence felt. So if you hear the barking or see the blurriness appearing beside me, it's Dean Dog wanting to make an appearance.
I
But
think he
it
heard
is
you.
a, yeah, I think he did. I am also passionate about all things tabletop. I think I've spent half this stream so far talking about my illness and my health. Thank you for listening and caring. But I do
Oh,
care very much about playing the game and getting people involved and really just sharing the stories or sharing lots of stories with lots of people.
Mm,
So, yeah, lovely to be here again, my
as
dear
always,
good to have
friends.
you.
What are
Good to
we
have you
doing
both.
good to have you.
tonight? Oh.
Good question. What are we doing tonight? I hope you're out there on the chat to ask us those questions as well, but also to give us your thoughts. We really want to hear about this. Tonight is an interesting one. I've been trying to get this out to my friends, my family in particular. For those of you who don't know much about role playing games and
Mm,
the players who are there and the dungeon masters or games masters, that kind of
mm,
thing. What are they, basically? But also, what do we do? And that's the big focus for tonight. What do we do when we're actually running a game?
mm,
And I think just to have a little bit of context for this, we're going to focus tonight on our role when we're running a game. We're going to be talking about the variety of skills that we pull from, knowledge we pull from, and the activities we engage so that we can actually run a game. But what we won't be talking about tonight, just so that it's clear as well, we're not going to be talking about the building of a game, as in what we do in terms of pulling a game together behind the scenes before a game day starts and all that kind of stuff, the running of the game. We're not
mm,
going to be talking about writing of the story for the games for your group, or the stuff that you do when you engage your group outside of the game as well to see if you can get together or kind of work out what kind of story you're going to play. And it's not about learning the rules. This is an important point. This is about
Mm.
once you've done all that, you've learned all the rules, you've set everything up, you've got your story, you've got your
Because we
players
all
in
know
front of you.
all the rules, right?
Oh, yeah,
exactly.
like
Every
we
system, all the rules,
always
all the
do.
time.
Yeah, we're so
Mm-hmm.
up to date with the rules.
All of them. Yep.
This is about the game day. Everything's laid out in front of you. How on earth do we run it, and what do we do? Like, what's the point of what we do? So we're going to
Mm,
kick off there with we'd love to see your thoughts in the chat and get an idea if you've got some ideas on this, or if you have questions about the things that we bring up. Please post them in here. Tell your friends, get them on board here, especially the guys who don't know what DMs do and GMs do. So let's kick it off. And Jared, you had something in particular you wanted to start off. We came up with about 7 different types of things we realized that we
Hmm.
pull from and juggle in the air throughout a game session. What do you want to kick off with?
Oof. I mean, like the just like obviously when we sit down and we prepare for these games, like you focus on rule stuff, you focus on content and things like that. But all of that content has to exist somewhere. So
Mm,
is it in the world? Generally, you do need to have a world for people to play a role playing game in, whether that is the room or the dungeon or the entire universe in the case of Spelljammer or Planescape or something. You can really
mm,
open up that the
Mm.
scale of your universe. So effectively, your scope of how much information you need to keep present, either written down or keep on the surface of your mind and bring to the forethought while you're executing a game, and describing certain elements or bringing certain elements and the timing of everything. The bigger your world, the bigger your scope needs to be. So you could just say, in this room, there is a lot of interesting things, and we could spend, or say in the Yawning Portal, you could spend several sessions in just one amazing location that has just enough information to keep every single session interesting and keep that story going,
mm,
because it can be that simple. Or, like I said, I'm currently running Spelljammer. I have to constantly think of multiple worlds, multiple interactions, effectively multiple solar systems in which the players can navigate and move to and from and through, and
mm.
then all the way down to the planet, and then the continent, and then that tavern. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, a little bit of a big idea, but there's always a good starting point, and that starting point is start
How do you
small. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
I was gonna
just
ask, how do you do it in a
You s-
game? Because I
yeah.
know you've talked about your amazing tools before, how you build your world, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
I
But
mean,
that's a
yeah.
lot to keep track of in a game.
Absolutely.
just as you're
So,
about to answer that question, I was going
sure.
to just say for everyone out there,
Mm.
if you don't know what Spelljammer is, and if you don't know what these worlds are, it's almost like imagine if you had Harry Potter, you could actually have a game that's just set in one classroom, and the whole game is there, and your job as GM is the lore to know what's happening in that classroom, what are the rules of spells, and blah 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 blah. What is the teacher doing? What is the thing that's going to happen in that game? Or it could be
Yeah.
set throughout the entire of the wizarding world of Harry Potter
And
in the
beyond.
Dumbledore era or something like this, very
Yeah.
specifically then, and you've got to keep across all that. So back to
Mm.
Jared's question, sorry,
Yeah,
how do
so I
you do it?
think
Yeah.
I think obviously, like when we do talk about like starting a new game or starting any game, there's obviously themes, right? So your genre, your theme, and everything, that's
Mm,
going to pre-establish a lot of this sort of stuff that can immediately be explained away. So when you're watching something like Harry Potter, or you're playing in a certain sort of genre game, like if it was in the Wizarding World,
mm,
when the DM describes the dishes that are automatically doing themselves, again, like you see that in the
mm,
Weasley house, we don't really know how that works, because usually we see people cast a spell with a wand, but that's obviously magic that's happening outside of that. But it can be pretty quickly explained away, or at least assumed that there's a thing that does that. So you don't always have to have the exact answer for why something is that way if your groundwork does that for you. But if you are looking to bring in that specific content, the less content you bring, the more detailed and nuanced and more flavor and more of your own expression can come out. So if you are running or creating a world for the first time, just start with a village. Give it a general area to
mm,
exist in. What's just outside the village, and then who's some important key players there? Because you could fill a village with up to say 1,000 people, but you're not going to keep track of 1,000 NPCs because the players aren't going to interact with them any. So
mm,
that balance and that mindset, again, we're going to keep saying the word mindset, and that approach is just knowing how much content is worth bringing, having it that forefront, having it your mind, and also being able
mm,
to take a note of what you would like to have, and have that quickly reference, say, a name and an accent and a quick description of an NPC suddenly brings a whole character to life. And well, now welcome to my tavern. So it can be that simple, and that, yeah, that looks very impressive, but when you just take those few elements, you suddenly
yeah.
got a fleshed out world that feels more real. So if that's all you're trying to achieve, start small, do a town or even a room, expand from there. Because again, you're also only needing to focus at one session at a time. And something Ian and I
Mm,
discussed is timelines when we were talking about prep for this episode. We were talking about his mindset of how he plans. He knows how much time he has to perhaps run a short campaign. So he kind of has an
mm,
idea of what's happening over that time. Whereas I generally run one shots or campaigns. So I'm either thinking
mm,
in an hour based time set of what should happen over that session, or I'm thinking, okay, I know where I want them to be, and I'm just going to create cool stuff in the middle. And I don't really worry about that sort of thing. So that's my particular mindset. But I'll
mm,
quickly kind of wrap up this point by kind of listing off some of the things that we do keep track of, or at least I think, we try to keep track of. So effectively, the geography and the locations of the world, not just the places your
mm,
players are visiting, will visit, but where they have been. So you can drop foreshadowing about where they need to go, and also where they've been is also important because what have they left behind? What impact have they left on the world? So again, that doesn't
mm,
need to be an element, but these are all just things that we start to think about the more and more we develop that mastery skill. Your
mm.
characters and your creatures. So outside that village, is there just your classic goblin sort of raiding party, perhaps some orcs, perhaps a troll? It can be as simple as just one key creature, and maybe that troll, has befriended some mountain lions, and the mountain lions also guard his territory, example. But
Yeah.
again, you're also going to leave an impact on those characters. If you do manage to slay the troll, where do the mountain lions go? Do they now become the new threat? All of these
Mm,
things come as you play and develop that. Now, I was looking at my notes from 2019 on exactly this as
That's how
well.
early we prepare for these episodes.
That's how long I've been preparing for this show. Um,
4 years.
effectively, you have secrets as a GM. Now, these secrets are
Yeah.
literally pieces of information that may or may not make contact with the players, and how they make contact can depend on their impact. So, if it's, oh, this bad guy is maybe a good guy, or this good guy is maybe a bad
Mm,
guy, the timing
Mm,
of that reveal is going to be everything. But if it's, say,
mhm,
mm,
Mr. Tavern Keeper is having a bad time with his wife at home, and she's thinking of leaving him and she's going to take the kids, unless, of course, that troll is dealt with. Suddenly, you have a decision as a GM. Do you bring that information forward to be the motivator? Do
yeah.
you tap into the
mm,
emotions of the players, or is that just why that tavern keeper's like, I'll pay you whatever you want? What's the motivation? And Thea's going to be tapping into player sort of feelings and reactions and how they're going
mm,
to get into that soon. Of course, you do have beautiful players and their characters. Now, the characters are going to have their own stories. The players might have their own secrets and
Mhm.
stories as well, such as recently in one of my live games, a changeling who did not reveal to the party that they were such until many sessions into the campaign.
Yeah,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the more you encourage your players to embed themselves in the lore and create their own stuff, and their own existence and their reason for
Mhm.
being, I don't ever like more than like one page of backstory. It's completely unnecessary, I feel, because you can always grow, you can always expand, and the
Yeah.
DM's just gonna have a hard time sometimes because it hasn't come from them. So unless you're building it together, yeah.
Mm,
And with all that comes trust, a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of, hey, I really want this cool thing to happen, whether that's coming from you as a GM or from the players. And you're
mm,
not always remembering all of this all at once, and it ebbs and flows, but you need to have all of this on hand ready to add to a game. And you need
mm.
to have that during a game, before a game, and even while, I was on my lunch break today, sitting at the park, I was thinking, hey, I know what I need to do next for my Spelljammer campaign. So you're
Mm.
always thinking about it. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
your mindset and your ability to hold all of this information will grow. And we have dabbled on note keeping tools and stuff in the past, but I absolutely want to reinforce that your note keeping system is going to be the best thing for you until you find and add and evolve moving forward. But things do change on the fly, don't they? A best laid plan
Yeah.
does not survive contact with the
Yeah.
players. And at the end of the day, where you thought your session was going to go, where you thought your world was going to end up by the end of a campaign is almost certainly not going to happen. So, uh,
mm.
how do we get
Completely
comfortable with
agree.
that? I think,
Yeah,
yeah, you might have some
I
answers
think
for
that's
us.
I mean, I think that's really important stuff to think about because
Yeah.
and it does
Yeah.
weirdly, almost as if there was a plan, ties into some of the things that I wanted to talk about.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think that knowing what am I trying to say here? So having an idea of the world gives you
Mm.
options, and that's kind of what
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about when we're looking at D&D or most tabletop games are about collaborative storytelling. And I think I might have
Mm.
said way back in the first episode that that's one of the really important things to me. And part of that, when you're making that a game, is that this is something that evolves, just like Jared said. You could have the best laid plans. You could have the most Agatha Christie classic Catcher in the Rye story set out for you. To be fair, I've never actually read Catcher in the Rye, so, bit of an imposterizing there. But hey,
Mm.
the best idea for a story, and your players are going to go in a different direction. And that's okay. I know that some people have different levels of comfort with that, and that's also okay. But
Yeah.
I know we're not talking about session zero here, but that is one of the things to perhaps touch on in session zero is
Mm.
understanding how comfortable your players are with, let's say, little nudges to get them back on the story. For me, when we're talking about like being part of this collaborative storytelling activity, I like the idea of having a general story arc. And I think I might have
Mm.
mentioned a couple of times before, I tend to run a lot of one-shots, both online and in person as well. But all of them take place within the one world. And
Mm.
within that world,
Mm.
there are genuine arcs that are happening. So everything that happens in those one-shots can change what happens in the world. Now, that's what works for me. And that means that I can keep track of these various goings on and figure out where characters and players as they come in and out of the games fit in.
Mm.
But to do that ties back into what Jared was talking about is you need to have a general idea. And that ties into the next point that I wanted to talk about is as a DM, you need to know, well, I think you need to know, I recommend you know, what is your level of comfort with uncertainty? And
Mm.
by that I mean, how much prep is going to make you feel comfortable? For me, it's changed over time. I remember when I first started getting back into DMing, I'd have pages, I'd have descriptions, I had pictures stuck on to these pages so that I could describe things.
Mm.
I would have lots more stuff. Now, I'm not going to say what game this is for, but I may have been coming up with the plot in the car as I drove there.
Yeah.
I've never done that. What's
And
that like?
Many
no,
times.
no one's
Many
done
times.
that. But again, because I had an idea of this broad world and stories that were going on, it can fit in. Now, for me, I'm comfortable with no more than a page of prep most of the time. I will, if there is something intricate about battle maps, have those prepped. But that's me. And I know where my level of comfort is in terms of uncertainty. But if you're someone that feels more anxious and wants to have more things prepped, I recommend that you do that. Because if you are comfortable as the DM, then your
Mm.
players are going to have more fun. That said, don't get too attached.
Yeah.
It is a collaborative storytelling thing. And one of the skills, and one I think the key skills of being a GM, excuse me, one of the key skills is
Skills. Yeah.
picking up on what's tickling the players and where they want to take
Mm.
things.
Yeah, huge.
It's you could have a grand dungeon crawl planned out, but your players really want to investigate Bob the Goblin, who you just made up on the spot, who was
Yes.
hanging around selling flowers. And that might be where it needs to go. What I have found helps with that, though, is I have modules, and not like a module that I'm going to sell for $1 million, but hey, Wizards of the Coast, call me. But I have
RPG.
elements.
Yeah.
Yeah. That can, I have encounters, elements, things that can slot in that will still support that general story direction or story arc, but I have those ready to go. And that means that if the players are going off in a different direction, I can very quickly mold that. And so the players, I don't know if I'm always at my best. Certainly tonight I'm not, as I'm sitting here coughing and spluttering all over all of you. But I know that if I have those things prepped, it means that if I'm not at my best, I can still have something there to back me up. Speaking of not at my best,
Oh.
excuse me. So yeah, so I think that's the thing. It's and picking up. So the way that you can pick up on, well, the way that I pick up on what tickles the players is that really almost terrifying focus in on Bob the Goblin or the level of their engagement. And I'll talk a bit later about verbal, non-verbal cues that I find really helpful. But I do find that some of those cues that indicate that a player is engaged and enjoying the game, that can help me know whether I should spend more time on an encounter, more time on an event, or whether it's time to move on. And I mean, I think that's a key thing. Often players will get super attached to a character because they like the accent. And I feel like, hi, this is just the character I've made up on the spot with an accent. But that is another key skill of GMing, I think, is acting that out. And I reckon maybe one of us with some kind of potential experience in theatre could talk about that. Wait, no, you're both on that side.
I could definitely give that a go. I thought I might actually just jump into the conversation because we can definitely talk into acting anytime. I could do that. But I was going to say, I was leading into active story editing and the lore keeping. It's a really interesting one. The Bob the Goblin one, my God, how often has that happened? Where you just have, there was a meme today on Facebook, and I think it said something like, you walk in, you see the cloaked person, hooded over with these kind of like globes flowing around them, ready to say, ready to talk to you, it looks like, with an intent look in their eye. And then the players say, who else is in the room?
Who else is?
And you're like, there's a goblin around the corner named Bob. And you're like, what's he like? Like this, and you're like,
What's he doing?
Yeah.
and it's like
Simply
just
drinking a
adapting. So
nail.
there is that, but it's
Yeah.
also, I wanted to have a look because it's going back a little bit to the lore thing and about secrets. And I was going to ask you, Jared, how hard was it keeping that secret of that player, or how hard was it revealing that secret of that player?
Ooh, very specifically, not at all. So again, when it comes down to things like that, I think I said in our little prep chat before the episode, you can absolutely outsource, lots of different things, and we can talk about like outsourcing as a skill as a GM and being able to have your players manage and regulate certain things. But something like that, I didn't have an agenda for that. Again, it came purely from the player. It was the player's idea. It was the player's amazingly cool story. Like the reason why they are changed into this other person, this other persona, this other character entirely was so cool. So I was absolutely down with it, and I knew that that person wasn't going to be malicious about it. They weren't doing it to be deceptive, and for any reason that would come down the line, it could have been advantageous. And I think even I might have even toyed with the player because when they were going through Spelljammer Academy, all of the spellcasters were able to try out spelljamming. So they would sit in a helm, attuned to a spelljamming helm, and see what that was like. And I made it a very emotional experience. So obviously that taps into your core being, your soul, your mind, your spirit effectively. And so that tapped into the changeling, that tapped into the core being rather than who he was trying to be. So there were some descriptions and stuff that possibly didn't make sense to anyone else, but for them it was, aha, that hits home more than anything else. So you can play
And
with
that's
it like
connecting with
that.
your player.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
opportunity to connect with the player rather than seeing it as a plot device or a big reveal. And to be honest, I actually can't remember what the reveal was too specifically. I just remember it being fantastically memorable. And at the time, it was out of necessity. And when it came about, it was very
In the
satisfying.
moment.
Yeah, exactly. In the
Yeah.
moment with no prep on my behalf. So the
And
player
I think
had
that's
full
part of that.
agency. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I think it links into the active story editor, because I was thinking about that too for you, Thea, and just the idea of not just having the lore, but knowing, okay, what's going to be a good point to bring this story, or not even what's going to be a good point, knowing you're in a moment and you know that you've got particular story threads that are important, and just going, oh, I can bring this in now. And it's like that juggling that ball. Have you had a moment, Thea, where you've had something particular that's like a reveal that you've been building up to, and it
Yeah, I
came
think it's
about in an organic way rather than a planned
organically.
way. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I would say with the way that I play or run games at the moment, most of my reveals will come organically. Um,
yeah.
I think, and that is more a case of, oh, I've just seen a whole bunch of threads come together. This is a good time for this to come out. So I'm thinking a game, part of the ongoing online game that I've got going on. I think that we had a very small wizard um, who had a story element about all their clothes were too big for them, and it just so happened we were in a crypt. It was a laboratory under the town, and they were trying to figure things out, and I went, oh. This is a perfect time for that master that this wizard betrayed to suddenly be brought back into the story.
Hmm.
Mm,
So I tend to find myself pulling things together from the players. And I think that
mm,
ties into when we talked about lore is I've got an idea of that overarching story arc and when
mm,
the pieces fall into place that say this is that module that come in now. So I think
mm,
and I really enjoyed that because the player wasn't expecting that either. We had spoken
mm.
about, hey, if your master ever turns up, would that be okay? And they're like, yeah, do what you like. Always music to DM's ears. Do what you like with that. Okay.
That is very
Mm,
cool. It's like I can, yeah, the idea of just being able to run it as organically as possible. I'm really glad you talked about before, Jared. We talked about that I've planned some things because of the amount of time I have for certain games, because purely because I'm also
mm,
trying to think, if I'm doing an introductory game session, then I've got a lore that I know for the world, but it's also, I know I want to make sure they learn the social pillars,
mm.
the exploration pillar, and the combat pillar. I want to make sure they tap those three, one per session at least, so that at least
Mm,
we get a chance to focus on that and then play with it as we go on. So I'm trying to actually juggle that at the same time, but having an organic moment where someone's got a moment where they brought something in. I love what someone said. I think it was Loss AU said gaps in backstory equals GM gold.
mm,
Completely agree. So it's
Yeah.
like you have a moment where someone says, and like, I had my character. Could they have come from this village? And I'm like, yeah, sure, that's okay. What were they? They were a farmer in the town. Oh, okay, cool, cool.
Mm.
And then you're in the middle of role playing something, and you're like, oh crap, that's right. This farmer sees you, and says, oh my god, you're back here. What are you doing? You
mm.
realize that you are, you leaving here has had this effect on whatever, and it links
Mm.
into whatever story thread you've got going on. It's
Yeah.
gold. It is. It's
Mm,
fantastic. So it's like, and then
Yeah.
they feel invested. They become part of the story. The others are
yeah.
like, okay, what's this got to do with? Try to ask them. Like, I have no idea. What is it? It gets them interested in the mystery behind that. It's
Mm,
fantastic.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. You also can have the flip
yeah.
side of
there's,
that, and like obviously, with D&D and like races and classes, they do give you like racial features like dwarves in a
Mm,
mountain, stone, geography, stone cutting, masonry, all of that. Cool. Mechanically,
mm,
that's a thing. It ends up being
mm,
more of a role playing generating mechanic
mm,
because it's like, oh, okay,
yeah.
cool, we're in this location. How do I interact with the world? My backstory
Yeah.
and my
mm,
genetics and my race and all of that stuff allow me to do X, Y, Z. Players can
mm,
literally come up with little things like that, like I grew up in a tavern. Cool. So whenever you're in a tavern, you know this, you know how to look out for the shady characters, etc. Like that isn't
Mm,
this. It doesn't have to be like a mechanical thing, but it comes into how the story evolves. How do the players navigate the world,
yeah.
and through
Mm,
through their own mindsets as well? Because then someone who's from a certain location, or if they grew up as a street rat, all of these interesting things, and then that
mm.
play also becomes valued because I know that on the Rock of Braal, which is this asteroid city, I have a player who's from a tavern,
It's Georgiana. Yeah.
and when they're trying to navigate from one location to another through that city, they grew up in the city. They know the quickest way.
Mm,
So suddenly that player really
mm,
feels important because of a thing they literally
mm,
just said where they're from, and that just changes
yep.
mm.
everything. It's a new method of transportation, and it opens up different
Mm,
opportunities, and that can happen deliberately and on the fly. Absolutely.
mm,
Yeah, I think that's really
yeah.
good. That's why knowing what your players' characters have as part of their skill set or their background. I'm
Yeah.
so glad there's backgrounds as well, where it just
Mm.
has
Mm,
a feature that has no mechanical benefit in the rules. It's purely
mm,
flavor of who they know. or an area, a region or an environment they're used to.
Yeah.
So every time they head into that environment, you can go, oh yeah, and it's like, you know, that this person over
Yeah.
here is probably the best person to speak to. You could probably find information from them
Mm.
or whatever. It's great.
Yeah.
So this leads on
Yeah.
to how do you interact with them, and that's
Mm.
when it comes to another skill set for us GMs. I think if you're GMing, there's part of the thing that you must have some feeling for acting or something. I
Mm.
think some kind of level of performance, because that comes
Mm.
into this naturally. So as games masters, I'll speak from my experience because it's different for every GM as well. Some people love putting on
Mm.
voices. Some people like would rather die, and it's like you don't need to put on funny voices or anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing, I think, when it comes to the side of acting is just that what is the nature of the characters that the players are going to interact with, and it's like
Mm.
as simple as a one shot where you've got maybe one, two, or three characters that they'll be involved in. It's thinking, okay, then what is their role? Who is this person in this story? What do they mean to the scene that these guys are in? And it's
Mm.
like keeping
Mm.
things simple, having one character that they interact with per scene is ideal, because then it's
Mm.
just that interaction that you need to do. And then thinking, yeah, what's their purpose? Like,
You don't end up
why
talking
are
to
they
yourself.
here?
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Which,
there's a
oh
classic
gosh,
Batman comic book scene or cartoon scene where Batman has to talk to Bruce Wayne. And that's what I come up every time two NPCs have to talk to each other, I pull out phones because then the players know who I am, and
yeah,
obviously I do accents and stuff, so it'll be
Mm.
yes, Bruce, we have to, yes, I know that it's
yes,
very important.
Yeah.
Batman, I really need you to listen here, like just you know.
Yeah.
that's a
So
Yeah.
really good technique. Actually, I think
there you
that's a
go.
really good
That
way
you
Mm.
just
can have
to
that one for free.
clarify. That is
But
so
for
cool.
sure,
It's
I was going to say, it's so hard sometimes to keep track. And like, I will do vague accents, but my accents wander badly. I'm sure I've done a tour of Europe with a single character. Um, but that's actually a
that's
really nifty technique, is even if it's just
yeah,
low. Yeah.
Yeah,
I look like we're
yeah,
very
that's
surf
yeah.
cool.
enthusiast.
You can keep it behind the
Having
DM screen if you don't want to be
Yeah.
doing that. You can be like, "Yes, this is me. I'm here, and now I'm this person,"
or
or I
literally a
will
tilt of the
physically
head.
turn and I
Yeah.
will
Yeah,
physically talk to that
that's right.
person.
Yeah.
That's even more fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you're adding more theater.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that's a simple way of doing it. To be able to get
Mm.
the difference across for the players, because it's all about perspective. Who are they talking to in a scene?
Yeah.
But if you do keep it simple and you just have one character that they're talking with, how do you get the
Mm.
yeah, how do you get the flavor of who that is? I highly recommend tables. Tables are great, which just have little
Mhm.
personality traits or little physical traits that they have or
Yeah.
ticks, whatever it is. Have that as just nearby if you're like on the fly trying to have something and just roll for this, and it's like they
Mm.
gently have slur to their speech. So, sure, yeah, I can. Well, I do this usually from now and then. You got a character straight
Mm.
away who you can keep going with. Has to
Mm,
have nothing to do with the story, but it
Mm.
becomes a story and it becomes
mm,
something to connect with, and it becomes memorable. I think, Jared, you said something really important before. When you're trying to have a memorable moment, is to connect an
Mm.
emotion with it.
oh yeah.
And I think that's key for
Mm.
every character that they interact with. What is the mood of the
Yeah.
character that they're coming into is
Mm,
key. So if you
Mm.
have that, I'm trying to think of something that's not coming up so to give away for certain games. So anyway, there was a particular, oh yeah, there was a half orc head of the guard of a pilgrim caravan heading down, and I had a very particular mindset for him that he's a war priest and he has no time for anything else. And there were drums, like they were heading down south with the characters as guards, and then they could see things were chasing them, and he's running up to them, and he's straight away he says, "We need to take this seriously. These guys are going to come for us, and our job is to protect this caravan." So he came in really seriously at the beginning of this. So they realized, because I also wanted to say his point, his role was to get the
Mm.
characters into the mode of we're going to be attacked and we've got to take this seriously because this looks dangerous.
Mm.
And then you can add other things when it comes to acting, like music in the background if you want to, like having the drums about whatever it is, and so like getting them all into the mood there, sort of thing. That's an acting technique. It is. It's just having the
Mm.
lights and sound and what is it?
Yeah,
Smoke and mirrors
atmosphere.
is
Yeah.
fantastic to help with
Yeah.
atmosphere and to
Mm.
build a scene in particular.
Mm.
You can add those as well to help the mood of the scene, to set that and
Yeah.
what the purpose of it is. Or you have the upbeat tavern music in the
Mm.
background that people are having a light and lively time. So even that
Yeah.
character, after you've had that
Yeah.
big battle and you've settled down and survived, and you're sitting down with a drink with that half full guard and everything can
Mm.
shift. So you've still set
Mm.
it up with whatever his voice is here, but now he's here and
Mm.
he's really. I can't. You guys are great to fight with. Thank you. You got to stay with us. You've got to come
Yeah.
with us further south. You're excellent. And it's like it builds itself depending on the mood of the scene, I think. And if you've got a
Yeah.
hook for them to start with, just keep going with that. It'll evolve anyway.
Yeah.
Don't make it hard for yourself. Keep it simple as well.
I think it's actually interesting a point you were just talking about, like saying sort of that acting and performance side of things, because I think you can still perform without having to do voices. Because I know on a lot of the
Yep.
forums people talk about voices and accents, and some
Yep.
people aren't comfortable. But you can even physically change the way you move. You know, if you're
Yeah.
playing sort of someone who's very close to nature and is a cleric or something like that, even just moving
Yeah.
yourself slightly, as opposed to someone
Yeah.
who's very down the line, they know what they're doing, they're giving orders.
Yep.
That's not
Yep.
changing my voice or my
Mm.
accent, but even just the physicality, it portrays a separate
Mm.
Your
character.
voice did change though, because
It
again,
did.
how you perceived and how your body language
Yeah.
did, it
Yeah.
draws that
Yeah.
out. And you can get
Yeah.
down to
Absolutely.
the nitty gritty. There is a
Yeah.
fantastic video. I will try and find it in a minute. There is
Mm.
this beautiful
Okay.
voice actor who says you can do 1,000 voices. And if you take the
Mm.
Yeah.
basic, we
I think
won't
I've
get
seen that.
into it because this isn't about how to
Yeah.
actually do voices, but your pace, like how quickly you
Mm.
talk, how urgently you talk. I haven't changed
Yeah.
anything
Mm.
else except how quickly I'm talking,
Mm.
but also
Yeah.
how light you're talking. And again,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
see that immediate thing, but then there's
Yeah.
stabbing, how aggressive, how vocal,
Yeah.
how sharp, but also how laid back or breathy,
Yeah.
or is it nasally, or is there other
Yeah.
things that you can add? And then suddenly you have a lisp or some other kind of thing,
Mm.
and I'm now someone completely indistinguishable from anyone else. Like
Mm.
you
I think we
you
need to
can
do a
add
full
those
episode on
elements. I
this
mean,
Big
as
on
yeah,
well.
that.
we can get into
Yeah.
like those
Characters.
specific skills, but as we said, we're not really talking about specific
Yeah.
skills, but just
Yeah.
having the knowledge
That.
that that's an available option. That
Mm.
if you
Mm.
do want to just think about, as you said, your
Yeah.
position, your poise, your tone, that can
Yeah.
honestly be enough. You don't have to do a
Yeah.
voice if you don't feel comfortable, because a lot of people don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
understand. People think that their voice is their entire personality. So to do
Mm.
Yeah.
anything to deviate from that, which you
Mm.
should do in a controlled, friendly, fun environment like role playing games, breaks you out of that. And
Mm.
then the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. And man, is it fun.
Mm.
So yeah, don't be
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll wrap up my point so we can talk about a couple of others as well, because
Yeah.
it's so true. Everything you've said, we could talk, and I think we need an episode on this because there's some fun
Mm.
things you can do. But there were a couple
Yeah.
of things I wanted to just really briefly wrap up on. And one of them was about don't even worry, like unconsciously, you will change your voice. You do this every time.
Yeah.
And this is something beyond this. I think this is really good just
Mm.
for the value of what role playing games do in general. You change when you are in a different situation, you change your
Mhm.
voice. If you're talking to your boss, it's very different from when you're talking to your best friend and you do it unconsciously. Or sometimes you might do it consciously, depending. It's things like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
So knowing the purpose of why they're in the room, knowing the status is a big thing, knowing that.
Mhm.
So that means does this character think they're above the other characters? Do they think they're
Yeah.
peers? Do they think they're beneath them? That kind of thing will change you straight away. And
Mm.
number one thing is why are they there? Having that purpose of what their role is there. Focus on that because
Mm.
that helps you then um, it changes the way you speak because are
Mm.
they the kind of person who's keen for their help? What is it like? Think of I'm keen for help. I really need your help to
Mm.
do this. Are they honest about it? Or are they a bit deceiving about it? It's like,
Mm.
they can kind of go around things and it will come into your voice. Or
Mhm.
are they the kind of people like, I'm not going to tell you anything. I don't trust you, or I'm actually hiding things from you, but I'm going to pretend to be
Mm.
your friend. And it's like, what is the
Yeah.
purpose of their role in the story for
Mm.
here? what do they know and what do they don't know really helps with that too. That comes again to the
Yeah.
story lore thing. But in any event, there's so much we could talk about what
Yeah.
we do in terms of trying to bring some flavor to the different
Mm.
characters that come along and just to make it interesting. And so getting into that is another point that we can talk about. Jared, I'll hand over to you. And this was talking about setting up the world of the story. It's linked to the
Mm.
whole acting thing, but in this case, it's actually about setting a scene and
Oh
that
yeah.
creativity that comes into it.
Yeah, for sure. So I've definitely
Mm,
touched on previous episodes where we do one of our prep episodes, one of the first episode where we did talk about prep and our approaches and our methodology. Mine being heavily based on the chefing principle of mise en place, a French
mm,
term that roughly translated means to put in place or to have its place so that you have all of the elements of a dish or something that you will need during a service or, say, a session. So you can do a lot of this work, and Thea, you've absolutely mentioned beautifully this evening the amount of prep that makes you feel comfortable to run a session does not mean the amount of prep that you need for that session. So I have
yeah.
recently on the weekend got my big vinyl battle map that I have and my markers that I use, all my different colors, and I spent a good evening watching a movie, drawing out these beautiful maps, and yeah, they pretty much went from the top of the on the spelljamming ship from the top of the dungeon, the ship, all the way to the bottom, and then that's where the session ended. But I needed to know that they could navigate all 2 dozen rooms. I needed to know where they were
Mm,
going. I needed it out visually. And by the same token, there's going to be a lot of things that you might feel like you need to prepare. Like if you need a list of 20 NPC names, all categorized by race and class
Mm.
and gender and all of those wonderful things, by all
Mm.
means, because you may never use that list. I know that when I
mm,
got into 5th edition, I printed, so Bocob's Blessed
Mm.
Blog, if you guys can find it out there, I printed off this beautiful A4 piece of paper and I recently found it just scattered amongst my RPGs things. That list of NPC names has been with me for a long,
Mm.
long time. I have not used it
yep.
every single session, but by goodness, it was in my DM binder. So
Hmm.
That is
exactly that,
something that I need because I
right?
always come up with names.
Yeah.
It's like,
I
this
will,
this
yeah,
tabaxi is called
yeah.
bottle on desk.
Yeah, classic Bottledon. So
Hmm.
yeah, sometimes you do need to do that, but like if you feel like having that list of names is going to be the perfect thing for you, so that you can always reference that and you feel comfortable knowing that you've got that crutch, you've got that thing that you can lean on. Because as a
Mm,
DM, we do stand steadfast and we build ourselves up. And again, the game mastery, that master thing is a bit of a fallacy when you're first
mm,
starting out. So if you need these little reinforcements,
yeah.
these things
Mm.
around you, by all means. But you can't always just do this on the fly. So when you are setting a scene,
Mm.
there is going to be some detail. You can't just say there are 3 people in the room and the room is
Mm,
made of stone.
It is a room. You
Cool.
sound like
mm,
my Duolingo
It
right now.
it is a room.
There is a
There
window.
are 3 people in the room.
Cool.
There is a window.
Yeah.
The window is open.
Yeah.
You
mm,
can, yeah, you show, don't tell. Don't describe what's in the room
Mhm.
in terms of
yeah.
functionality, because it's okay, you see these things, but you see 2 tieflings and an orc sat in the corner
Mm.
playing a game of
Mm,
dragon chess.
Mm.
One of them
mm,
seems to be incredibly
Mm.
frustrated, the other one wondering where the rest of his drink is because he's dominating the game and he's gotten bored. Is that what
yeah.
you need to describe?
Yeah.
But there's the place,
Mm.
the creatures, the characters, and that's pretty much it. So if you describe the room with sight, smell, and sound, you're pretty much
Mhm.
hitting it off.
Mm.
For those who are
Mm,
wizards or psionics or anything
Mm.
interesting, recently, Spelljammer, the ship that they were about to get on had a weird psychic psionic energy that the Spelljammer, while they were in their helm. Spelljammer is
Mm.
I need to clarify that. It is both a setting and a function
yep.
of a ship. It is the person who
Mm.
Yes.
does the jamming of spells. That made even less sense.
Wow. Really
So the
fascinating.
helmsman,
Tell us more.
let's just say, so the helmsman, because they're attuned to the ship and its functionality and its function through space, I feel like their
Mm,
consciousness is extended beyond. So They're going to feel things. They're not going to see or smell or do anything
Yeah.
like that. They're going to have a sense of where these objects are through the space. So your players' perceptions, again, people are going to have dark vision. People are going to have better hearing. If the dwarf puts his ear to the stone door, does he hear more than the gnome or the elf or something? So you are always thinking through your character's eyes, through their senses, and that's what you should be describing through your character's senses,
Yeah.
not
That's a
necessarily
good.
what you think is important. Or
Mm.
don't over describe things as well. Like, yeah, there's about 3 or
Yeah.
4 barrels in the back of the
Mm.
room. They look a little dusty, but if there is something important, like footsteps through the dust, if there's is there a trail or something, if you're trying to lead them somewhere, great. If the
Yeah.
players prompt you
That's detail.
later
Yeah.
on, they
Yep.
can be like, oh, do I see any footsteps? You can always add that in later.
Mm.
But if you thought that was
That's
important,
yeah.
add it in, and have those elements, have those threads. And you do need to have a little bit of that prepared to move forward, but don't be afraid to add these things, as we've been discussing, through the reaction, through the, I mean, all play, all of the execution of a role-playing game is a back and forth conversation. It is this collaborative building
Mm.
and molding and shaping.
Yeah.
So that will change, but when there is details, you will add them.
Can I jump in on that details thing?
Yeah, please do.
Mm.
Chekhov's barrel or Chekhov's door or Chekhov's lock.
Yes.
I am sure we have all experienced that, where you mention something in passing with maybe too much detail, and
Yeah.
immediately, because a lot of players, they understand mechanics of games, they played a lot of video games, and in a video game, your objective is probably going to be flashing at you. So if we describe things too much, I think that can be used to both as a, hey, I'd like you to pay attention to this, but also as the red herrings, which I
Yeah.
think are super important as well, as having those things
Mm.
that the players might fixate on and might say, I want to find out more and more about this. Because that can be those really fun moments in the game.
Oh yeah.
But having a mechanic ready for that, I may have had players really interested in a door,
Yeah.
which I hadn't thought beforehand where it was going to go or what kind of lock was there. I had a vague idea of the general DC of a door. Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
beautiful example of that. If anyone's run Eberron 3rd edition, there is a fantastic series of adventures that you can get, and when the players do make it to the Mournlands and find the, I think it's called the White Hearth sort of research center, or whatever it is, where they're researching arcane devices, and they go down into this to explore this. There is a foundry and a forge, and so there's this big stone building in this huge underground cavern that they walk up to. The walls are 20 feet high, and this huge, beautiful door with ornate things all over it. Again, I could have said, like, there's arcane runes and like this interesting inscription in a language you don't quite understand. So the players did their fun thing, and they interact with it, and they do all of these things, and they're like, oh man, we tried this spell, we do this, we try that. And of course, as a DM, I knew that there was a hole in the roof of the stone building that they could climb through. That was how they were meant to access it. What do? They look around, they look for clues, they investigate, and they interact with the world. So I said, yeah, you know what, you look around, and in some rubble there is this wrapped up staff, and on the staff is the same language. And I just came up with this on the fly because I knew my players, and I've run this multiple times now, the players do not think climb to the roof of the building, because of the way it's described. It is basically a solid stone box, and what you then describe in detail is the door, and you can't not describe this beautiful door. But that does lead them in a direction that perhaps the module
Go for the
writer
door.
was not necessarily thinking of. So you
Yeah.
can use that as a guidance tool where you want them to go, but at the same time, you do need to find that balance. And I've done it exactly the same twice. I didn't come up with a new solution the second time. I ran it exactly the same way because I wanted to see how a different group would handle the same situation. And that's also a lot of fun as a GM, as you will start to kind of catalog these experiences and how you interact with the world. And I will just sort of wrap up this point by saying, again, in my Spelljammer, they were being led through this ship, and one of the rooms I described is the corpse room, and there's multiple races of different corpses that are laid out in this room, and I won't go into detail, but I did, for the player who I knew was going to be interested, And then everybody kind of understood what was going on. I already prefaced and got approval for everyone that we were running space horror, we were running cosmic horror. So the descriptions
Yeah.
were visceral, and that allowed me to split the party. Now, allowed me, aka, I suggested through my descriptions and language that the one player or two players should go and look at this, meanwhile, the others were led elsewhere. I had collaboration. I had put this idea out there that this is what we were doing, and that just meant that the conversation in the moment wasn't as challenging as it needed to be. And I didn't need to make it, I didn't need to like lure them or do any kind of trickery or be like, oh, you see a glint of something shiny. It was simply, this is a horrible looking room, and the right person went, yes,
Yeah.
please. So
Hooray. Yeah.
you will need to know your
Yeah.
players to a degree, and
Yeah.
you get to do that over time, and that's so much fun.
It is. I think it's interesting. Purdy comes up with an interesting point in the chat talking about when
Mm.
you're someone who flies by the seat of your pants, which I think we have all maybe done that at times.
We have to.
Sometimes it is too easy to give too much information.
Can be.
And it's hard to tell, like with your players, knowing your players. You know that you have you've got a rogue. They might just want to use all their rogue skills and pick every lock they see, despite the fact that there is a shining red exclamation mark at the end of the corridor.
Yeah.
Which now that I'm thinking about it, I really want to include in one of my games as some kind of
Yep.
ghost.
I think
Yeah.
that's so. It is so important, that whole idea of knowing your players, because that also adds to how you can describe the scene and what things will hook them as well.
Yeah.
But it's and also the knowing of, like you said, if you've got to try, if you've preset modules, if you've actually had a preset game that's written there and you've gone through it, which is part of the prep, we won't go into that, but you can see they're not going to get this necessarily to going through the hole in the roof. I love that idea. It's that having that sense of, how do I keep this open enough for them to investigate? What do I describe enough to show that this clearly looks like this door has not been open for a long time, or whatever it is, so they're, you're
Yeah.
not sure
Yeah.
how to get in,
Mm,
or whatever it is you say. That description is so important. And at the same time, you don't have to do too much. I think it's such an important thing where you say, just keep it simple. They will ask questions. They will start visualizing in their mind and say to you, is it like 5 stories? And you go, okay, I can tell you it's
Mm.
only 1 story high. You can then
Yeah.
clarify as time goes on. I think that's valuable. On that note, I was thinking it was interesting you said, Jared, about um, knowing their senses, knowing how they look at the world and how
their
they see the
perceptions,
world.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to start, this is going to link into something, Thea, you're about to talk about, and you were starting to hint at as well, about knowing the rules. Because something, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons is passive perception, which is where you aren't even realizing it, but you will notice things depending on how high your passive perception is. People with passive perception of 10 know that there's a forest in front of them. People with passive perception of 15 might see the goblins hiding behind and having a look at you, thinking they're hidden or something like that. But you knowing those rules means that you can say to that player, oh, by the way, you've seen these guys hiding over here. Your friends clearly haven't seen that yet. What do you do? And that's shifting into it. So what are the levels of rules education refereeing do you feel we need to
Oft.
I love that question because I think there is a broad range of how people like to use rules in tabletop and D&D specifically. I know that myself, I sit very much on the side of rules are guidelines, and they are there to make sure or facilitate everybody having fun and everybody feeling that it's fair. I know there are also people that, and they're often characterized as rules as written type players and type GMs, where it is all about knowing the tiny details of the rule and applying those and balancing them and figuring those out in a way that they enjoy playing the game. And that is absolutely a valid way, but it's not the kind of game I play. So when we're coming to talking about running a game, it's really important to understand what your players need, and more importantly, that they understand what your style is. So I always say up front with games that I believe rules are guidelines. They're here to make it fair. If there is a disagreement, I will make a call And if we need to discuss it later, we will. But we're all here to have fun. We're not playing for sheep stations, unless we're playing for sheep stations, which would be a strange way to run a game.
I
But
don't know that reference actually.
really, wow,
Yeah.
that might just be
We'll
me.
talk later. Oh,
Yeah, we'll talk later. We'll talk offline. Oh gosh, I'm sounding very corporate. So I think but I think it is really important though to have an understanding of where you sit with the rules. I, as may have hinted at early in the game, I have not read every single thing that has been published about D&D, and I have not played every single character class from level 1 through to level 20. So I don't have an intimate knowledge of all of the features and all of the rules and everything that can apply. So for me, I think it's really important when you have players saying, oh, I can do this. It's like, okay, yeah, if it's clearly within the rules, like it's a reaction, amazing. Where you have disagreements, where you've got where rules are open to interpretation, for me, I think it's really important to gauge where the players are at and where they're engaged in the game. And Hartstead asked a really interesting question as well about how do you deal with players that are not taking the game seriously. And I think this kind of ties into it as well. And the answers in chat are really really relevant as well.
Yes, really
yeah, thank you. Is like it comes down to trying to build consensus about what people want to get out of the game. Now, some people are going to want to get really intense role play moments, which if you are so focused on rules as written, perhaps you might lose those moments. And there's a balance between, well, where are these players having fun? And if I apply certain rules, are they going to stop having fun? For example, running all of your lair actions, all of your legendary actions, and spending all the time on the DM's moves and monsters. Is that going to be as much fun for the players? Yeah, maybe. In some situations, it will be.
Yes. They very much enjoyed your lair actions, I should say.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. That's picking up on where the players are at, because it's building that tension and that sense of, it's not real threat, but it is perceived threat to the characters. That there are stakes here. And that
changes over time with your level of trust with your players, doesn't it? Yeah.
100%. And it ties in so much to the point that I want to make, is that one of the examples I think of was when I was playing. And we came into an encounter, and I'm pretty sure there was an undead beholder, which is great. And first go, my character got paralyzed and could do nothing for the rest of this combat. Now, I'm a DM and I understand all that, and I was still really frustrated with that game, and it put me off. And I'm into the game. I imagine if I was a first-time player, that potentially would put me off. So when I'm running these as a technique or a skill, is I will have options. If a player dies first shot of, first round of combat, there are options for that. There is something in that story, in that overarching story, that is going to happen to them so that they can remain involved. Cool. And I'll try to have that within the rules. And I know I'm going kind of sideways from talking about adjudicating rules and refereeing, but it's kind of there. But I want to have those options. And I've had this happen in some of the one-shots. In fact, 2 recent games, one character died, I think about 2 rounds into combat. But they ended up on another plane. And that was actually really important. And if they hadn't ended up in that other plane, there was greater peril for some of the other players. I also had a particular action happening at an in-person game where there was an illusion going on, and one of the more experienced players accidentally absolutely one-shot killed one of the newer players. But I had an option for that, and they ended up they became treasus, as it was. But I think that's because it was a forest thing, and there was an illusion, the barbarian hit them, absolutely wiped out had a crit hitting their companion. It was great. Anyway, but having those options I think is really important, but making sure that they are balanced, because I think there is a balance between, actually when you hit death, suddenly you see your deity and Deus Ex Machina, actually you just wake up because you fell down and accidentally ate a blue mushroom kind of thing. Yeah. I think that's what the rules are there for, is they give you that framework to make it feel balanced. but I don't feel that rules should be applied so far so that they become bindings.
I think that's
Yeah.
something that was pretty huge with the
Mm,
shift in fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons in particular, because I know from old school
mm,
games things were like way more rules driven, and
mm,
and it really great that in the beginning of the book they said if a rule doesn't suit you, don't use it, or just use it as a guideline and work around it. I think is the most. I think a lot of role playing games have
mm,
shifted towards that as time has gone on. For the
mm,
very nature, this is to be a game for us that we're creating the rules and
mm.
story as we go on. What's
Yeah,
working for us, and I think that's vital.
yeah.
There's a few things that the guys in the chat have said, and a big thanks to everyone who has.
Mm,
Quite like to Heartstead and to Pedicious, and to anyone else I've not mentioned in particular. How do you adjudicate when someone's like
mm,
completely making jokes in the
yeah.
middle of a pretty
Oh,
serious
yeah.
scene or and part of that, I think, the adjudication of rules is also the rules you set up for yourselves. We talked about session
Mm,
zero. You've got the rules of the game. That's for the, this is the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever it is. Could be My Little Pony, role playing, whatever it is. But you
I
know what
want to play
those kind
that.
of rules are. The mechanics. It would be a so fun game, I swear. But
Hmm.
Hmm.
the mechanics rules, that's one thing in adjudicating them. And it's as important. This is a social game. We're adjudicating the rules of what are the rules that we set up for ourselves. What kind of game are we playing? Is it a space horror where it's going to be violent and bloody and terrifying and tension building and blah blah, and it can get quite hairy at times as well. So we're ready for that, or is this like, look, actually we're trying to play something that's
Mm,
first couple of films of Harry Potter really light on and very simple, and it's kind, and people there's violence is very
mm,
minimal in that kind of sense.
Mm.
And also, how do we treat each other? Like, are we
yeah.
trying to have a game where we're very much encouraging people to listen to each other and
Mm,
everyone have a fair go? If we set that up
yeah.
and someone's doing that in the game, then you've got recourse to say, we've set these expectations. This is not quite
Mm,
as fair. Can you give these guys a bit more of a go?
yeah.
This makes sense. I think
Yeah. I
setting
think,
those expectations
yeah.
and then keeping across them is a big role
Mm.
for GM as well.
I agree
Mm.
100%. I think that being comfortable to say, and I've said this to players, it's like, I can see you're really enthusiastic and you're really enjoying this. But let's give a bit more space to some other players as well so that we can explore all of their stories. And I
Yeah.
think as a skill, figuring out how you address that before it comes up, particularly if you're a newer DM, I think is really important because not everybody is a apparently croaky middle-aged crone and happy to do that. But I've got the voice going on. Um, but
Lean into
yeah,
it.
so I think that is, yeah. So I'm gonna say, but I think that yes,
Mhm.
it is to if you think there is a potential for difficult conversations,
Yeah.
thinking about how you would address those first, but also reaching out to other DMs, making connections. I mean, I think that even if it's on forums, there's lots of different forums out there. You're going to get a bell curve of advice and
Yeah.
thoughts on all of those. Um, but I think that that's helpful to feel that you're not alone. I mean, on the whole, most D&D groups are pretty supportive and DM groups are pretty supportive as well. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important. I mean, I know that the relationship that the three of us have is really important because we bounce ideas off. And if one of us has a difficult game, we're able to talk to each other if we need to.
Mm. Yeah, there is this balance of the
Mm,
fact that, again, I'll keep bringing back to this point of the whole idea of the title of Game Master, Dungeon Master, has the inherent
mm,
sort of air of respect. You seem to have this authority, whether it's rules,
mm,
whether it's the expectation of controlling an entire world. And it's always, I love finding new players when I get to say to them, okay, so it's like a video game, but my brain is the engine and everything that you interact with. And they have the aha moment of, okay,
mm.
now
Oh,
again,
cool. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're going in from sort of Ian's point where you can have difficult players and have those conversations, and have to maybe perhaps tactfully sort of deflect and
Mhm.
shift and change the
Mm,
direction, and you can do that on the fly. But sometimes it does come down to having that actual difficult conversation, which, as you said,
Yeah.
mm,
the conversation before is sometimes better than the conversation after. So if you can set those
yeah.
expectations, session zero, we need to, yeah, like I want to really just start creating some like principles and some documentation so that people can actually just
Mm,
access this stuff and have it for their players. So I want to work on that because then you can
Mm.
say, hey, look, like it's not a contract. It's not everyone signs and we agree by these rules and you get 3 strikes and whatever. But yeah, I mean, again, thank you, Harsted, for not only coming and having this conversation with us, but I hope you really enjoy your transition into becoming a player and perhaps
Yeah.
even a dungeon master
Mm.
eventually. There is going to be this strange phenomenon that happens with any group of people is you don't
Mm.
necessarily know how you fit until you do and you experience
Mm.
what it's like to be with that. And the fun thing about a D&D group is you're also generally in character more than you are the people that you are in
Mm.
some
Mhm.
cases. So those troublesome conversations or those difficult things may only come up as in character afflection. You might really enjoy that person
Mm.
and who they are, but sometimes they can use their character as an excuse to act upon behavior that isn't savory or acceptable or
Mm.
even, whether it
Mm.
is like it's an incredibly tense moment, one of the players is
Mm.
dying, or an NPC's just been eviscerated and turned into a puddle of goo. That's not the
Mm.
time to be like, oh, careful, don't slip,
Yeah.
But
Oh no.
but
Yeah.
That's reading the room.
if
Yeah.
everybody kind
Mm.
of understands, and of course there's rapport and there's reading the room and general social skills, which of course some people might not be able to fully navigate,
Mm.
and I think D&D and role playing games is a great opportunity to explore that and test that and go, oh,
Mm.
okay, well that was an in character thing that I tried rather than a me thing that I tried, and when it doesn't land, you
Yeah.
don't feel so personal about it. But it's gonna feel
Mm.
that way for the first few times. If you were to be like, yeah, don't slip, that might land as the funniest thing with the right timing and the comedy. I
Mm-hmm.
can only think back to Community where Pierce gets invited to come and watch the bad movie and they make fun of it and he tries so hard to be funny, and it
Yeah.
doesn't work until it does, and then the
Yeah.
physical humor comes out, and but it is exactly that. It's just like, in the community, in a show like Community, there's a group
Mm.
of people that have come together for a task to be a study group,
Mm.
but they become so much
Oh,
more than that
absolutely.
in a
Yeah.
short period of time, and they play D&D.
Let alone they play D&D as well. Let alone that, which
Yeah.
is one of the best episodes. Ignore what
Mm.
people are trying to cancel it. It is a fantastic episode. But we do actually have to wrap up. We have gone through a bunch of things here.
Hmm.
Just before we do, just to add on to this point about the rule side of things, and I love how you were saying to reach out to people to
Mm.
talk about it, other people with the experience. How would you do this as a GM? Because it can feel like a huge weight on your shoulders at times to try and to help adjudicate a number of people who are your friends or
Mm.
people you want to play with as well. I want to put it out there as well that it's really good to engage with your players, and this is something that can be
Yeah.
in the game. Even just to take a pause and say, "Hey, look, you know what? Let's have a break. Let's just have a." That's the reading the room thing. But how do we feel? What do we want from this? I think we need, some kind of way to navigate this, and it might mean actually just shifting the game for a moment to do that, because this so works when you've got an open group of people open to talking about things. This game is about, let's talk about ideas and find a common ground. This is, and
Mm.
build this together, and let's see where it goes. And so,
Speaking of finding a common ground, join the Discord at one of those two links that may
There is a
pop up
link
in the
that will work.
chat.
One of them, the adventure starts now. You choose your own
Yeah.
adventure anyway.
so on that note, we're gonna just to go briefly over some of the points we talked about. I think we're gonna have to come back to this. It may have to be down the track. So we have managed to cover a few elements that GMs actually do when they're running a game, which is keeper and preserver of the lore, the greatest story of the whole game, and how on earth you bring it in. We talked about being the active story editor on the fly, so that it engages and keeps it interesting, but it also links to the story that you've got along the way. To act as the culture, the characters, the creatures, and in the cultures of the world that you're in, and the different ways to keep it interesting. To set the scene, to actually describe it, to give some creative nuance to it, and also to give hints perhaps to the players so that they know what's going on, and they know what to connect to. And we talked about the rules educator and referee of knowing the rules, but also knowing how to apply them and what's going to really work with your group. Is these are just some of the things. There's a couple more things that we will be talking about that we think that'll link to it. we'll get to them another time. And I think actually when we get to those extra ones, we can also broaden the stuff that we've already talked about. This has been fantastic, and it's really great just to clarify certain elements of the balls that we're juggling in the air while we're trying to play the game and just keep it interesting and fun.
For
So,
sure.
guys, thanks so much. We are wrapping up for now,
We
but
are wrapping up. Dean Dog is having very unhappiness that something is going on in the background. So
It is time.
well, I'm going to hand over
that
to
is
Jared because he's got an interesting
yeah.
topic for next week,
What are
which
we
is
doing
going to
next
be,
week?
Oh, it's more than
before I
a
even
topic.
say it, is
It's far more than
the
a topic.
last one for this season as well.
Yeah.
We have this will be our
Oh
10th
my
episode next
gosh.
week. We'll be double figures. We're going to go out with an interesting topic. Jared, do you want to take it away?
So we have sporadically had a couple of guests on, but we are going to be capping the end of this season with a lovely local, and by local I mean Australian, community member who has not only created his own beautiful podcast and interviewed some of the people that we would like to get in touch with in the near future, but Dan of Fairy Fire Studios is going to be joining us. And while I don't know exactly what kind of conversation we're going to have, I just know that his charisma and his ability to have the amazing conversations that he has with other members of the community is just one of the first reasons I would love to have him on the show, so that we can all just keep the conversation going. And that's all I'll say for now, because it's just going to be a good time. So yeah, we will put in some we'll put up some socials out on Facebook and in Discord. I want you guys to go check out Dan and Fairy Fire Studio. I will put his tag quickly in the chat so that may be accessed sooner rather than later. But yeah, please come and tune in, and make sure you go check out his Instagram and Facebook, and his podcast out on Spotify. He has a bunch of episodes with some amazing local and overseas content creators, such as AJ Winters locally, and even Michael Shea of Sly Flourish. So all of these people that we would like to
Cool.
get in touch with and chat to, he has that knowledge already. So it's like we're talking to all of these people all at once.
I can't wait.
So excited.
But if you
Yes,
guys
so
can't get
Cody,
enough of us, if you can't get enough of us right now, our episodes are out on YouTube. We have a couple of episodes from our live stream
yes.
now as videos on demand. So if you want to listen to us on the car, trip to and from work, or
On the car. Just on the car. Car surfing.
Just if you're on the car and you feel like you need some Dungeon and Dragons and role-playing games advice, we got you covered. But yeah, you could also listen to Dan. But we're here for now, and we're done here. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure.